All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another edition of Wilds on Film. I'm your host, Stephen Wiles. Today, I have with me two very special guests, and I know you're only used to me having one, but today I have with me Dwight and Stinson.
Hey, I'm Dwight.
Stinson.
And today, we are going to discuss something that I think the three of us, I wouldn't exactly call us experts, but something that I know the three of us have a good amount of experience with, and that is the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Now, we recently all saw the new 2014 release of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and as much as we could probably spend an entire episode talking about that, we decided it would be a better idea instead to go back and look at the first two films from the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles series. So, we're going to start with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 1, which was released in 1990, and it was directed by Steve Barron. Now, Steve Barron, from best I could tell, is only known for Coneheads. And this is, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. Coneheads was a fun movie, but he hasn't done much else before that, and he hasn't really done much else since then except for some TV. And the reason I kind of bring this up also is because we're going to get to our writers here in a second. Which is Bobby Hinlock.
That's his Herbeck.
Herbeck, yeah. Bobby Herbeck, who was only known previously for doing TV as well. He mostly wrote the story. And then we had Todd W. Langen, who did the screenplay. And also, only known for TV, he was mostly the writer for The Wonder Years. Now, the reason I say all this is because putting this team together to do the movie at this time, you wouldn't think much would come of it because no one had really previously been known for too much else past that. But yet, I think we would all agree you got a pretty great movie out of it, right?
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Okay. So I want to start with our general first impressions. With that, we'll start with Stinson on when did you first encounter Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles?
Daycare. Only thing I really knew about them were the color of their masks. We each wanted to be a different one. Someone wanted to be the one with the blue mask with the swords. Other wanted to be the guy with the yellow mask or orange, but we didn't know the difference. With the sticks on the chain. Mind you, we were in daycare, and I always wanted to be the guy with the red bandana whose weapons I had no idea what they were called.
That makes sense. Now, did you see the first film when it came out in theaters?
Yes.
Okay, and by that point, you were already a fan of the cartoon?
Yes.
Okay, had you read the comic books?
No, I still have not read the comic books.
Still have not read the comic books. Okay. What about you, Dwight? What were your first in meetings of these Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles?
It would either be the show, just watching it after school, and maybe Saturday mornings. I don't remember when exactly it came on, but those were the times you would sit down and watch cartoons. Was after you got home from school and early Saturday morning before no decent human being would get up.
Right.
And I also had a computer game back on my old Tandy 1000 system that had the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
I'm going to stop you right here. You were playing a computer game with Ninja Turtles before anyone had a computer, really.
So this
guess.
Wait, this was a licensed Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game.
It had the some of the original art because they all had the red bandanas. They didn't have their own color-coded bandanas. But I played it, and it was hard.
Now I know that there were video games for the Turtles before the NES game, but that was my first video game experience with the Turtles, which if you've never played it is still one of the hardest games to me to this day. But wow, so you had that?
Yep.
Okay, and what about?
I didn't get very
What
far.
about the comics?
I, like Stinson, have never read them.
Really? So I'm the only one out of the three of us that read the comics. I almost called us experts.
Don't be a hipster.
I almost called us experts, but I have actually read the comics. I read them in high school when they were in black and white, but I'm not a big fan of black and white comics, and so I've recently gone back and reread the first 4 issues because they recolored them probably about 5 years ago now, but they just re-released them all on Comixology, which is where I read them. Now, so what is your first experience with the movie? Did you see the 1990 film in theaters?
Yes, I did.
Okay. What, I know it's kind of hard to ask this, but do you remember your kind of general reactions to the film?
I was absolutely enthralled. You had turtles, ninjas, they were teenagers, which was eons ahead of any age I was going to reach at the time as being like a 4 or 5 year old. So I was just generally happy with everything I saw.
I really liked it. I thought obviously the animatronics with the masks and the martial arts, they all handled that really well, and that just was my first. I think it was one of my first experiences with Jim Henson Studios outside of like the Muppets and stuff.
Sure, I can see that.
So that was really impressive.
Okay, well, now that we've kind of established that all of us were giant Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles fans as the age appropriate when we saw this, recently, as I said, we've gone back and rewatched these films, and we want to kind of take a look at them, looking back with, I guess, a more clear eye and a little bit of time on these movies. Like we said, this movie was made in 1990, but to me, I'll start off by saying, as I was watching it, I was still pretty much enthralled from the opening scene. And I want to discuss the opening scene real quick and exactly how it sets up almost a perfect environment of the city. We see Danny and April O'Neil early on, who are two of our human interest characters, as I will call them, because you need human characters outside of just the Turtles and Splinter. So we see them, and we see the crime wave that April is talking about on the television happening right in front of us, with this kind of interesting network of people switching this wallet back and forth, and people getting their TV stolen, and entire truckloads of stuff being stolen. Do you guys have anything to say about that?
I remember thinking it was very funny when I first saw it. Now, obviously, maybe that makes me predetermined to a life of crime or something. I don't think so, but
I hope not.
As a kid, I was thinking that's, because all the stuff from the back of the truck was looted in a few seconds. When he came back, he was all surprised that it was gone, and it was just so funny, and the woman, her reaction.
Yeah. The woman on the fire escape had probably the best reaction to her TV being taken. Okay, and then after that, we kind of move into the first attack. We have a few segments without the Turtles, and then we move into the first attack on April. And so, what I don't know. What did you think about the way that they handled introducing the Turtles in this film?
They did actually kind of a good job of them putting April O'Neil, who had a bit of a mouth on her a lot of times, and she gave a smart comment to obvious people she should not have been mouthing off to. She had been sticking her nose in places she shouldn't have, and she was a woman alone in a dark, dangerous part of the city, surrounded by all these dangerous people. She gets slapped in the face by the guy who played Donatello, and then all of a sudden everything gets fixed by a shaky camera running at people.
Okay, that's a very good point. Two, since you brought it up, before we let Dwight answer, I do want to say that being an adult, one of the neat things is knowing that each of the Turtles got to be outside of the suit. Because if you don't know, except for Raphael, who was not only in the suit but voiced his own character, the other three Turtles had a person in the suit and then a voiceover for the character. But Raphael, of course, did both. And then so each of them got to appear outside of the suit at one point or another. So what was your thought about the first appearance of the Turtle?
I liked it. Obviously, to go ahead and get them into the movie as soon as possible. The newer movie didn't do that. It built tension some. But the original, from the get-go, you had the Turtles, even if you didn't see them when the lights went out, you heard them and you knew who they were because that was who you were there to see the movie. And then they went down in the sewers and they introduced them right off the get-go. Plus, you had the emotional connection of, hey, the Foot are bad. They just tried to take out this character that we're supposed to be getting to like. We know who she is from the TV show, April. And the Turtles came to save her. So that's setting up for their relationship in the future.
Right. Now, I will say I also really enjoy what Stinson brought up, which is the line where the Foot approach April the second time, which is telling her to keep her mouth shut.
Your mouth brings you much trouble, O'Neil. Shut it.
Yeah, that was actually a very memorable line, even as a kid, because I remember thinking, no, he didn't. He just slapped April.
Oh, he did.
And I also remember the kind of almost iconic scene when Raph loses his sai in the first battle, of just his head kind of poking up from underneath the sewer lid, and he's looking at it. And I love how the cops somehow didn't see the sai, but April O'Neil did.
Crime scene. They were probably looking at a bunch of other stuff, but it's a point to actually get April interested in the Turtles and to have them cross paths again.
Yeah.
Because when she pulls the sai out later in a fight, they knock it out of her hand towards the sewer grate. He pulls it back into the sewer, and it's like, okay, now it's time to go.
Right. No, they were in the subway. Yeah, they were in the subway station when he pulls it back in, right?
Yeah. And it makes that really cool metallic sound as it's being pulled across. I always thought that was neat.
Yeah, that was neat.
They also, through both of the first two movies, they make a point of kind of showing the police as inept, at least when it comes to the Foot Clan.
Right. Something we'll talk about is characters and actors that returned for the second movie, but I like that they had the same guy that played the police chief in both films.
Yeah.
And he really did come across as not only inept, but later in the movie he tries to cover up his ineptitude by putting pressure on April's boss to get her to stop reporting on stuff that's going on. And it's not because he's working with the Foot, it's because he doesn't want the city to know how inept they are. It's what it seems like.
Well, also, you got to look at the time frame. This is the early 90s. Go ahead and say it's also the late 80s. If you look at a lot of stories that were coming out of New York then, it was all crime-based. I mean, it was almost topping Chicago as far as crime per capita. And with all the movies that were also coming about that time about New York being this huge criminal hub, it just painted a picture in our minds of how corrupt New York was and how inefficient the police were in the time.
Right, which always amazed me, that how associated the Turtles are with New York. This movie was mostly shot in North Carolina, except for a few scenes where they needed actual Manhattan backdrops. And they did the same thing for the second one, and I noticed in the second one, the backgrounds change. There are several scenes that Kino is in that actually switch. They start with one background that's a very typical New York background, but then they go to another one, I guess because they couldn't keep filming there that day or whatever. But anyway, we're getting a little off topic. So, continuing on with the first film, one of the things that I always remember as a kid was how cool Shredder's first appearance is. In the first movie, his initial appearance is watching a wall full of televisions and seeing April O'Neil on one of the TVs, and he throws a knife into the TV. Now, as a kid, I didn't realize how important that is because the end of the movie also involves him throwing this knife in a very similar fashion when Splinter drops him off of the roof.
Well, he technically dropped himself. Splinter was trying to help him. He screwed himself up on that one.
Yeah, I really couldn't tell if Splinter was going to give him the speech and then drop him anyway, or if he was actually going to try to help him.
He had to catch the kunai when it flew past him. He was like, oh, lost the grip, sorry. And then he's like, oh, he fell safely into that dumpster below. He'll be okay. And then Casey Jones comes by. Oops. Kills him.
What did you think about Shredder in this movie?
I really liked him. Going back and rewatching it, that scene you're talking about where he throws the knife at Splinter, it really looked like it was... You could see him slowly going back for that knife. So I think Splinter at that point was like, okay, he's about to force my hand. This is just how it's going to be.
Right. And one thing I will say is that if you go see the new movie, the 2014 version of this movie, for one reason only, I think for me it was to see Splinter actually fight. Because of the way the puppet was designed and what they were doing with the puppets in the first two movies, Splinter does not move much. Now, he has movement as in walking and action, but he doesn't do too much else other than that. And I think in the new movie they did a good job of actually showing him doing martial arts.
Well, even in the cartoon, I think he only left the sewers twice.
Right.
And that was pretty much his thing. You almost, in all the kids' TV shows and all superhero things, they always have this one simple area where their leader, their mentor, seems to almost be trapped in this one general area.
And one thing I know, Stinson, I talked to you about was how in the new movie, Michelangelo, they seem to overplay the Turtles' traits, their individual traits, leader, scientist, anger bucket. And then with Michelangelo, it really just seemed like his was a horny teenager. But going back and watching the two originals, he still had that in these two. They were just kind of underplayed. I forgot about him kissing the TV when April was on there.
Yeah, he really... he really came across as wanting April from the get-go, and then...
Which is really funny because when he goes into the farm later, when they're on the farm, and he sees Casey Jones massaging April's shoulders, he seems to either not care or be more concerned about his turtle wax joke.
If you have a good line for a joke, you take it. Plus, I mean, what is Michelangelo going to offer April O'Neil? I mean, if turtle anatomy is kind of gross when you start getting to that side.
Yeah, let's not get.
Listen, you went into this, but you go ahead and start mentioning who they want their characters to be. You're supposed to, in the first movie, Danny is supposed to be your human side that you are supposed to relate with and watch the turtles on the outside. When really, growing up, no one cared about Danny. We only cared about Casey Jones as the person.
Right. And my one note about Danny is he's not a bad character. He does come across flat in several of his scenes, but it took me this long watching it to realize that every shirt he wears in the first movie is a Sex Pistols t-shirt. If you look, every t-shirt he wears is related to Sex Pistols. And I'm guessing that one of the writers, the director, somebody was a big fan. That's all I can guess.
Yeah. I thought that the writers were pretty much trying to draw a parallel, in addition to having his point of view, both on the Foot and then later on the Turtles. They showed sort of a parallel between Danny and the Turtles. They're both outcasts of one type or another. The Turtles, because of their physical appearance, that Danny feels a more emotional outcast. He doesn't connect with his father the way he feels he should, or whatever, and he ends up siding with the Foot, his faux surrogate family. Faux family.
Something Stinson and I were talking about after seeing the new movie is that the older movies have a lot of very, blatant themes. Family, doing the right thing, like you said, being an outcast, remaining in the shadows. And the newer movie just didn't hit on those as much. But those themes are definitely heavy in the first movie and a little bit in the second one, but not as much.
Well, even Shredder gives that huge speech to the Foot and all the teenagers who are going to become Foot. There's like these freaks of natures, these turtles. He's turning everyone against the Ninja Turtles. He's pushing them more into outcasts than they were before to begin with. So the city they're trying to protect, he's turning them more and more against each other.
Right. And one thing I like about this movie is it's an origin movie to a degree, because we start in medias res. We start with them already being trained and everything. But about halfway through the movie, Splinter starts to tell the origin to April O'Neil, and then later they break it up. You don't give the whole chunk of their origin story at one time. And I really like that. And now, it was kind of interesting for that time, and a little bit risky maybe, because if you notice the origin story, they just used a black background for most of it, and then had what looked like, I guess, claymation turtles is kind of what they looked like when they were younger.
Or smaller puppets.
Smaller puppets, maybe, yeah.
Now, was he telling the story to April, or was it to Danny? Because when he asked about Oroku Saki, he was like, whatever happened to him, I don't know, but you wear his symbol on your brow.
That's both. They broke it up.
That was the second part of the origin story. The first part, where it was just him and the turtles and their mutation, was to April. Then later, he told the Oroku Saki and his master, Hamato Yoshi's origin story to Danny.
As a kid, I went around for a little while saying, "Now I will finish what I began with your ear," but in a much deeper, cooler voice.
That's very Mike Tyson, Stephen.
Yeah, okay. I didn't mean for it to be that way, but just as a kid, I thought that was a cool line.
We should get a T-shirt for him that says that.
But Dwight, what did you think about the way that they handled the Turtles' origins?
I liked it because even though they broke it up, they answered the questions you had about them then. It was like, hey, we became mutated. We adopted ninja as a way to protect ourselves against the world outside. This is how we coped and grew up. And then later, you had the focus on Hamato Yoshi and the Shredder, Oroku Saki, because that was more pertinent to Danny and his relationship with Shredder and the Foot.
Right. Now, Stinson, you were telling me something about how we were talking about how the ooze changed color. In the movie it was green, but in the cartoon it was like a pink fuchsia kind of color.
It was a very bright pink. In all the movies it has been a green color, I guess because of how we associate ooze or anything radioactive, we always associate a green. But the cartoon, it stood out more than anything else in the cartoon.
Yeah.
Because it had its own color hue, it had everything that worked out for it. So whenever you saw it, even if you saw it in a very poorly lit thing, you would always associate, oh, that's ooze, that's a mutagen.
Right. And now, what did you think about the idea of a rat watching someone do kung fu or ninjutsu and learning from this?
It made more sense than the 2014 version when he picks up maybe a 30-page book and he immediately becomes a ninja master who can outclass Shredder.
I just assumed that they eventually got a library card or the internet or something and got more books. That was my guess.
They had the internet, but if you could learn ninjutsu from the internet, there would be no crime, or there would be too much of it. We would have nothing but ninjas. Instead, we have people who can perfectly point-click a mouse, and wow, people play that anymore, I don't know.
Yes. Now, I will say that the origin parts are one of the first things that I kind of noticed that I hate to say that this is probably the first time I've ever watched through these two movies and they really looked a little bit aged to me. There are certain parts that you can definitely tell were filmed at a much earlier time, but it still wasn't bad. I wouldn't say that any part of the movie was just grossly bad. It was still good all around.
Anytime you see a brand new Bart Simpson glass, you're going to automatically assume it's from the 90s.
Okay, that is a very good point.
Because he poured a Wendy's Frosty in a cup, and it was the cure for ooze.
We're getting ahead of ourselves, but yes.
Well, a little bit of that. Some of the fashions made me think this is really hit home the out of place, out of time. This is from the past. But for some reason, the second one more so than the first one because they were louder, mostly in that the rave scene, the
right.
club scene.
I agree with you on that. I think the second one felt more outdated than the first one, and that's kind of an odd phenomenon. I think one thing is that to keep in mind is that the sequel followed up really quick. It was out in 1991, and it was just it was a quick turnaround for a major motion picture.
Maybe you got to think how long I think it took them to actually get the first one released as an independent movie. And they may have already been working on the second one.
Right.
I don't know exactly how that worked, but I kind of knew there was something going on where they couldn't get it released in time.
That may be true. I know that they were working on the first film for a while, so that could be true. Now, one thing I liked about in these, and they've really done this in all the movies, but I don't like characters that feel too invincible. And the Turtles in these first two movies constantly are getting tricked, trapped, or one of them's getting separated and they're getting their ass beat. That's just how it goes. But they never really felt invincible. And there are a lot of times where they're doing strategic retreats.
Raphael was basically the damsel in distress in the first two movies. He got knocked into a coma in the first one, and he got tied up and trapped in a junkyard in the second one.
I do love, and I totally copied as a kid, whenever I woke up and somebody was just looking at me, I would say, what does a guy have to do to get a sandwich around here? Or something like that.
Did you regularly have people staring at you when you woke up?
Okay, no, not regularly. But it did happen enough that I felt like I could use that line with justification. Moving on. So
yes, please.
You bring up the interesting point about the farm scene. And I want to take a couple minutes to talk about the farm scene because this is a scene that is kind of risky, again, in a kids' action movie. The movie's rated PG. Kids are your primary audience. We all saw it when we were younger. And then you have this scene kind of in the middle where they really just completely kill the action of the movie, bring it to a dead halt, and you have not only the healing time for Raphael, you have the relationship building time between Casey Jones and April O'Neil, and between Casey Jones and Donatello, which I thought was cool, where they're playing the game of insulting each other going down the alphabet.
Yeah, showing each other how much they actually appreciate each other by making jokes about each other.
Right. And then we end that segment with the spirituality of Splinter talking to Leonardo and then all four turtles in the campfire.
Yeah, they're playing. He screwed up their Trivial Pursuit game by kicking all over everything.
Yeah, Leo did, yeah.
Yeah. Jerk.
Yeah. So what do you think? Let's let Dwight go first. What do you think about the farm scene as a whole?
I mean, I liked it. I didn't notice as a kid watching this. Of course, you really get wrapped up in movies like this, and this was a very overall very well done movie. So, of course, you didn't necessarily notice it. Looking back at it, you kind of have to have a gap there where your initial defeat and you have to let it sink in, and you got to train or do something so that you can come back stronger. But I agree that this was an unusual take on that it kind of stretched out longer than most of these type breaks, but they put the time there to good use with all the character building they did.
Well, you take the whole thing, what happened at the antique shop, it gets burned down to the ground. You can safely assume that they believe the Turtles and April O'Neil died in the fire. They get away in an early version of the Turtle van. Yeah. They drive all the way to the thing, and Casey Jones looks at the thing and says, "Oh, the radiator's, there's a crack in the radiator."
Yeah, doesn't he fake shoot it?
Yeah, just that's all we can do. Well, I have neighbors 4 miles down the road. Oh, by the way, you don't need to call your boss. You're fired. So with that one small scene, they're basically like, we're trapped here. Yeah. There's no reason for us to go get help. We need to stay here. It gives everyone the moment, the center. I mean, you have Michelangelo watching TV, old Rabbit in the Hare story. Not Rabbit, the Tortoise in the Hare story. And they're saying, Ninja kick the damn rabbit. And you're not even trying to win the race. So you go through in the Ninja Turtles how they would act in a calmer setting, and instead of it dropping the action dead, you're replacing it with character development, which even as a kid you could appreciate, because they did a very good job of even bringing Casey Jones into it.
Yeah,
he came in to save Raphael, and then he helped the Turtles escape.
Yeah, I want to take a moment to talk about Casey Jones for a couple different reasons. One, I'm very sad he wasn't in the second one. Two, I think Elias Cotier, I think is how you say his name, he did an amazing job with the character. He was a lot of fun. His and Raph's first interaction are great. One thing I didn't notice younger is that he is not only a epitome of man. He's a macho man.
It's who he wanted to grow up to be.
Right. He is very violent. He is probably the most violent person out of all of them.
He had a cricket bat, dude. Leonardo had swords. Which one of them was intending on leaving them alive?
Which one of them crushed Shredder in a trash compactor after he took a fall from like 6 stories?
He'd had enough of that. It was at the end of the movie. It had to go.
I love when Donatello looks at him when they go back to the lair and he says, "You're claustrophobic." And his response is, "I've never even looked at another guy."
Yeah.
That just screams like right macho over. Man.
Well, that joke went right over our heads.
I agree. I've seen this movie so many times. It's hard to say like when I actually caught that joke, but it was really funny.
That one scene though also set up to him figuring out where the Foot were meeting, because he had to go outside and sleep in the truck, and then Danny
saw
snuck
Danny.
out. Yeah. So everything was actually put together very well.
Sure. This movie, like I said, we are so accustomed now in the age of the internet to seeing so-and-so's directing this movie, so-and-so's writing this movie, here's all the actors. Well, you didn't know all that back then. But if you had known all this back then, you'd have been like, I've never heard of these guys, this movie is going to suck, But it came together really well. And I'm kind of amazed that they really, these guys didn't do much after this, because I hold this movie in such a fond place in my heart, but,
I started a few years back, I started to watch the second one. It was on TV, and I was watching it, and I knew, because I'd watched it so many times as a kid, I could place what each sound was going to lead to and what was happening. But I was honestly watching my childhood die before me, and I was like, what is this? What is going on with the second movie? And the first one still holds true to me, but the second one just seems to have lost a lot of its edge.
Dwight, do you have any opinions on Casey Jones?
I like what they did. They slipped in a little bit, like you say, with the claustrophobia. And also, when they're on the farm, they mentioned his injury, indicating while he's into all these sports, why he's not trying to play or anything. Yeah. He was a very good character. I do like the one thing, though, I don't know how this happened, looking back at it. He snuck up on a bunch of ninjas when they're fighting in April's antique shop apartment. You'd think they station some lookouts there, just even for the police or something,
They will from now on.
I have one better for you. When he follows Danny, do you notice he pretty much just waltzes into their lair until he finds one ninja who's by himself and then takes his clothes?
Good point.
Well, you look at Casey Jones and look at all the teenagers. He had the long, the grunge hair. He didn't look all that different from the teenagers.
Sure.
As long as he didn't look directly at him. But, yeah, he pretty much did the snatch and grabber costumes.
He also looked as old as the teenager at the end who tells the cops to go to the warehouse.
Sam Rockwell.
Yeah. Interesting note, if you notice, it's the Eastman warehouse on Laird Island.
Nod to the comic creators.
For those who don't know, Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird are the two guys who created the comic, and they were also worked on both films as the character writers for the films. So that was a cool nod. There were a lot of other little nods and stuff to different parts of the comic and other films in it. I want to go back to the violence for just a second, because something you two may not know, and I didn't know until I was doing some research on this. In the original script for the film and in the novelization, I didn't even know there was a novelization for this movie. When Tatsu comes back after the turtles have defeated them, he attacks one of the foot soldiers, a boy, and he almost kills him. And they even check his pulse and say he's alive, right? Mm-hmm. Originally, he was supposed to die, and the ratings board was not going to give them the PG rating. They were going to give them a PG-13 because of this, so they had to change that. Which is why, if you listen, when the guy says he's alive or whatever, it's not coming from any of the actors actually there. They had to record that later, so it's just kind of piped in.
And it explains why they still look so grim, even though they've just confirmed that this guy apparently will recover and be okay.
Right. Just a note, it was still, even though this was removed, it was still violent enough that Playmates Toys refused to do a special line of Ninja Turtles toys for the movie.
Their loss.
They didn't do one until the second movie, which we'll get to that in just a second. And Jim Henson also filed a complaint saying that they weren't sure they wanted to be a part of the second movie if it was going to be as violent as the first one. And I got to tell you, I'm still a little confused about this. And I understand, as an adult, I'm not looking at it through a kid's eyes, and maybe kids see it differently, but I didn't think it... I thought it could have been so much more violent. To me, one of the most violent things is the ending of the movie with the trash compactor.
Yeah, you really only see his helmet getting compacted. You know his head's not in it. But as a kid, you're like, oh, it's like someone's hand sticking out of the garbage or a shoe being misplaced. You're always like, well, that represents that person, so you're going to safely assume they're in there.
It's implied rather than shown specifically.
Thank you.
And I do want to say... I do want to say that the last scene with Shredder on the rooftop, which, if you've seen the 2014 Ninja Turtles... We're not going to go into how this relates to that. You obviously know that by now. But I love that Shredder just seems to drop out of the sky onto the rooftop to fight them. Did you ever notice that? Like, it doesn't show where he jumps from. He just falls. But I love that Shredder kind of gives them their time. Like, he's individually kind of whooping ass because they keep attacking him by themselves. And he stops and lets them plan for a moment, and he's just pacing back there.
He wants to hammer home how out of their depth they are.
Well, he's supposed to represent one of the old samurais who the ninjas fought, and they, like Dwight said, they were completely out of their league, and each one that tries to take him on individually, he just knocks them around. The only person I think that actually got a hit in was Leonardo, who cut him across his bicep with his sword.
Right.
And once he got cut, he just knocked him down. But like you were saying, when they were catching their breath, he was casually just pacing. I was like, I'll take as much time as y'all need. I'll be here all day.
I do like the makeup they did on the turtle suits to make them look bruised and banged up after that. As that fight was going on, they would get more and more hurt. And if you looked, even some of Shredder's stuff, like his suit, I remember seeing was cut on the back. I don't know if this was just it happened when they were filming all the fight scenes or if they actually planned it. But it looked like he had been, even though he was obviously winning, he at least had been put through some stuff here.
Right. Okay, and as a final point to this, I have a couple little trivia things, but just to close off the movie, am I the only one that every time I watch this movie, I get the end song stuck in my head?
Nope. I love that song.
That was the question. Are you the only one you do get the song stuck in your head?
Yes.
Okay.
But I answered with the no. You're not the only one.
Okay.
It's impossible not to get that song stuck in your head.
Okay.
It gets stuck in your head so much that they even made a joke about in The Last Action Hero.
All right. So One of the things I don't know if you guys knew, but Robin Williams was actually working with Judith Hoag. Judith Hoag plays April O'Neil, and they were working on a project together. And when Robin Williams heard...
Is that the Cadillac movie?
Yes, Cadillac Man. Yeah, good job. And when they were working on this movie together, she had told him that she had gotten the role as April O'Neil, but she didn't know anything about the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or her character or anything. So Robin Williams actually loaned her his collection of comics so that she could read about it. And I just thought that was really cool. And not long ago, the world lost Robin Williams, and that was kind of a neat story that I'm kind of glad I didn't know that before. I just found that out now. It's just another thing to show how he was kind of a giant nerd like the rest of us.
He was a true pioneer.
But I thought that was really interesting. There were a few mistakes. I didn't realize this, and maybe you guys did. I know for anyone who knows me, my vision's not so great. But apparently, several scenes when some of the turtles are talking or yelling or whatever, where the mouths open up a lot, apparently you can see the people inside the suits.
I didn't notice
Never noticed that.
Yeah. The only one I noticed when they're leaving, when the antique shop is on fire and they're leaving, if you watch Leonardo's sword hit the wall, it bends, and that's because his swords were rubber when it wasn't the stunt man, when it was just the guy walking around in the suit. And I didn't notice that until this time, that his sword legitimately bends like a toy sword would.
Well, if you think about those two sticks being on his back as a costume, it would make more sense for them to be rubber. Otherwise, he would keep getting it caught on that door and building was burning down.
Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and move off of the first Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and I want to talk about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, The Secret of the Ooze. As we said, this film was in 1991, so it was out pretty quick after the first film. And I know I not only went and saw this movie in the theaters, I went and saw this movie about, I think, 3 or 4 times in the theaters.
I remember my dad took me to see it. It was at the theater at the Macon Mall, because we were leaving the mall after I saw it.
I saw it multiple times as well. I was very much in love with it at the time. Going back, I preferred the first one, but
we had a sequel.
No, I agree. I think we have all kind of said that we enjoyed it, but this is definitely the one that didn't hold up as well. And I think we all enjoyed the first one a little bit more. Just to let everybody know, the director on this one was not the same as the first one. This was Michael Pressman, who again, up to this point, and as far as I can tell, has just done television and a few other things, but nothing that really, stood out. And we had a returning writer, Todd W. Langen, from the first one. And I want to open up this one and talk about, I want to start this one and talk about the opening scene of Ernie Reyes Jr. delivering pizza. And Ernie Reyes Jr. stumbles upon a crime in action. And I remember as a kid being surprised about this, because as a kid, I didn't know who Ernie Reyes Jr. was. Now, I know who he is now, and I'm a fan of his work.
Red Sonja.
But in this point, I'm thinking, oh my God, this dude has just stumbled onto this gang, robbing this stuff, and he's about to get his ass beat. But then he actually manages to defeat 4 of the criminals on his own, and thinks pretty highly of himself, I'm guessing, until the other 10 round the corner.
Because everybody's got a posse now.
Yes, everybody has a posse now.
Those pizzas aren't getting delivered either. He didn't think that very well through.
So what did you guys think of this opening scene for the second Ninja Turtles movie?
Well, you had a character who was basically replacing Danny. He was supposed to be your everyman character who you're supposed to fill in the shoes. Oh, if I learn martial arts, maybe I can come across this crime scene, and if I don't get stabbed to death, these Ninja Turtles will save me, and I'll be able to go on great adventures. It didn't happen.
No, that sounds about right, actually.
Yeah, but it never happened, and we're now living lives of broken dreams. But for a movie, it did a really good job of actually setting everything up for how the movie would go.
I think because of his physical work, he was teaming up with, obviously, the initial scene, he fought some of the robbers, and then later he was teaming up with Raphael against some of the Foot. I think he was trying to fulfill both Danny and Casey Jones's roles to a degree, and of course, that's a lot to live up to.
Sure.
Now, can't replace Casey.
Yes.
No.
Now, for those who don't know, the reason why Ernie Reyes Jr. was even in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2 is because he was one of the stuntmen for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 1. And they liked his work so much and liked his attitude about the film so much that they actually wrote the role of Keno for him.
So they Bruce Lee'd him.
Yeah, which, I mean, I think that's pretty cool. That means that you got along with the crew and, directors so well that they wrote you specifically a part.
Well, it wasn't his first big movie either. I mean, he was
True.
He was that little brat in Red Sonja who played alongside his father as well.
Yeah, he's been in some decent stuff, and he's done a lot of movies that just didn't really make it big over here. But he's been a busy man. So, and like I said, I'm a fan. Now, first of all, I want to talk about that opening scene because that's where we noticed a lot of little things about it. But my initial question, Stinson, why did they switch from Domino's to Pizza Hut?
Money.
I think that's right. Do you have an answer to that?
Well, it wasn't Pizza Hut. It was a private thing called Roy's Pizza.
Yeah.
I so miss that. The symbol looked like Pizza Hut to me.
They advertised
probably
Pizza
did that.
Hut because
Yeah.
in the beginning of you got the VHS tape, they had the Pizza Hut commercial. So there was Pizza Hut, I think, at some point in the movie. But yeah, Dwight's right. It was that it was a corner pizza shop that everyone loved.
I'm sorry. I'm going to blame my eyesight on that one again. I really thought that was Pizza Hut.
But
But
you're fact checking.
noted. But they did, in the first one, the only pizza thing I saw in the first one was Domino's.
Yeah.
And then in this one,
They
I thought
delivered
it was
everywhere.
Yeah. That works, right? Okay, so in this opening fight scene, we have our second movie's big intro of the Turtles, and we noticed a couple things. One, the fighting was a little bit more PG rated.
That wasn't a fight.
Yeah, they honestly seem like maybe because they defeated the Foot Clan, they were a little like egotistical about it, and they were really playing with those guys. Like at one point, Donatello pretends to be a knockover blow up doll.
Well,
Don't say blow up doll. It just makes it dirtier than it was.
They're obviously sized up their opponents to a degree because clearly they came out the winners without too much trouble. But
Right.
yeah, I agree. After coming off the win against the Foot Clan, a bunch of regular street thugs probably aren't going to give them much trouble.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of that was because they were told they had to tone down the violence,
Yes.
and they had. I think the only two people to even use their weapons in the second movie were Raphael and Leonardo.
Donatello
got to
uses
use
his
his
probably
bow.
the most.
Yeah.
If you notice.
It was more of a tool, not a weapon. The other
Yeah.
two got to use theirs once, and Michelangelo did the combat cold cuts.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's a very good point.
Which was funny as a kid, but as you're getting older, they're right on your belt.
Yeah.
Right
Now,
there.
I will say this. They didn't make the Turtles look necessarily less efficient because when they send Keno off to call the cops, somehow the four Turtles managed to round up 10 bodies and tie them all up. Also, in the first movie, their ninja skills really do shine through because at one point April turns to them to say, "You guys should hide," and they're already gone.
They do it in the second one, too, with
that's right, yeah.
working concealment.
Yeah.
15 seconds. Go!
Right. That was as a kid. I remember really liking that part of the movie because Raphael basically is like, "No, I got this. Don't worry." And the smoke clears, and Keno's just holding like 15 bells. So, as we discussed in the second movie, Judith Hoag did not return to reprise her role as April O'Neil. Instead, this time,
Paige Turco.
yeah, it was Paige Turco. Judith Hoag actually said she didn't return because in the original script that she received, a bunch of her scenes were actually cut out in favor of doing more with TGRI and the Professor. So I guess she was wanting more screen time. Now, my question to you two, I didn't really, as a kid, even notice it was a different April O'Neil, and rewatching them, I didn't mind her as much. But what did you think of the new April O'Neil?
She looked a little different. The actress they got was as close as possible, but she's just a minor part of the story. At least they had April O'Neil in it, but the fact that they changed actresses did not sway any kid I ever talked to or anybody. It was like, oh, there's a new actress who plays April O'Neil. So we have all four Turtles, Splinter, and the Shredder, right? People were more upset that Casey Jones wasn't in the movie than they were about April O'Neil being somebody different.
Sure. And as we discussed earlier, there were a lot of people who didn't return to this movie. There was a different actor playing the Shredder, but you said it was the same guy doing his voice, right?
Yes.
Okay.
That's correct.
So at least the voice stayed iconic, and you really couldn't tell, at least as a kid, with the Shredder because he wore his mask most of the time. In fact, I don't think he ever took his mask off.
One time he didn't have his mask, or at least the face shield of his mask, was when he first showed up, and he's covered in shadows. That
Right.
They make the comment about his face being horrifically scarred up.
Yeah. Well, trash compactors will do that if you let Casey Jones near them.
Yeah, or probably the rats were eating his face, so he's now more mad at Splinter's friends.
There you go.
Sounds better.
Okay. So I will say about I didn't mind the new April O'Neil. I actually didn't mind Keno. I actually, as a kid, really liked the character of Keno, and even as an adult, because it's Ernie Reyes Jr., the few times he kind of annoyed me, I actually didn't mind it. Like at the end when he wants to go fight, and help the turtles, I kind of thought, I was like, no, that would be me in that situation too. It's like, I'm sitting down here, I could be up there helping.
That is such a weird about face, though, at the end, where he's like, he goes to all this trouble of, hey, I got to go help the turtles. Then he shows up, he does one kick, and then he's like, okay, you're right, it's not my fault.
But that one kick almost helps turn the scene around, But we'll get to that. We'll get to that.
Also, almost exposes an entire crowd to mutagen.
Okay, that's a good point, too. We'll get to that. So, this is the part where they're living with April for a while. April's frustrated, and then
I bet.
we have the iconic new turtle lair that is shown off, which
subway station.
Yeah, it's actually modeled after the subway station next to City Hall in New York. So, what do you guys think of it?
Going back, I noticed the stained glass windows, and I'm wondering how effective that is with a layer supposedly underground. Like, are they lit from behind?
Yeah, Donatello probably put up lights behind them, is my guess.
I always thought it had something to do with the Renaissance style that they were modeled after.
Right, sure.
Because everything in there, even if you look at the masonry work, it has a very Renaissance feel with the stained glass, how everything's laid out, even the marble in it. So that could have been them going further back to their actual roots for their namesake. Or it could have just been, hey, we have a bigger layer we can do more with that isn't draped in shadows and human feces.
That's a really good point. And it definitely, I remember as a kid wanting to live in that layer.
With the turtles.
Yeah, I think most kids did. But
I think between, the Transformers ship embedded in the volcano, the Bat Cave, and the Turtles lair, everyone wanted an underground layer of some type for their very own.
I can't choose between the Batcave and the Turtles, so we're just going to stick to Ninja Turtles for now.
Right. Okay, so the other thing I kind of want to talk about is at one point we have the awesome scene with Raphael and Keno, but again, as Stinson pointed out earlier, Raphael gets captured. And the three remaining turtles go to rescue him. Thankfully, they bring Splinter along. My question is, how did Splinter know he was going to need that bow and arrow? Ninja Master. Okay, all right.
He doesn't have an iconic weapon other than, I guess, his cane in some of the series.
Nunchuck was how I remember in a book his weapon of choice was listed as nunchuck, which threw me off because I always thought that was Michelangelo's, but whatever.
Maybe they were just taking a cue from the first movie when he used Michelangelo's nunchucks against Shredder at the end.
Depending on what version of the DVD you have, it actually has profiles for all the Ninja Turtles and for Shredder, and it says their weapons of choice, food of choice. I love that there's a music thing, and under Shredder's music, it actually says, "I don't have time for music. I have time for world conquering." I was like, "That's so Shredder." That's
pretty much, yeah.
Okay, so after the turtles are caught and everything, after they are freed and everything, we are exposed to Toka and Razor.
The most vicious animals they could find, even though after they get turned back to their normal animal form in the later part of the movie, they're just sitting there chilling.
Yeah.
It's a wolf and an alligator snapping turtle.
It's an alligator snapping turtle and a wolf. And that's so here's the thing. Originally, the film company wanted to do Bebop and Rocksteady because by this point, Bebop and Rocksteady had pretty much been made famous by the cartoon. Now, for those of you who don't know, Bebop and Rocksteady were never in the comics. Well, maybe later, but they were never in the first run of the comics. And they were really created for the cartoon to have as henchmen that could seem kind of intimidating but get beaten up without having to have Shredder get beaten up every episode.
They're everyday villains who, if you don't know who the characters are, reevaluate your life. There's Wikipedia on the computer you're probably listening to this to. Just look them up and try to be smart.
All right, so originally they wanted to have Bebop and Rocksteady, but Eastman and Laird were actually the two that put the kibosh on that. So they created Toka and Razor specifically for this movie. So we'll start with Dwight. What do you think about Toka and Razor?
I liked them okay, especially as a kid. You know, you had the evil mutants. More mutants was better. It's awesome. More action. What's not to like? But yeah, looking back at it, I'm like, why did they not use something more iconic, more recognizable? And it just kind of doesn't make sense beyond we need to do something new and original, but not terribly, out there.
We had a drooling werewolf that loved eating candy and a mutated version of the mutated turtles. Imagine if the turtles were closer to being more horrific creations.
I remember even as a kid being confused. Why did they use another turtle? Like, it seemed like a perfect opportunity to use a different animal, but
they were always box turtles. Him being an alligator snapping turtle, those things are vicious.
Maybe they could have taken them towards the Slash direction. Slash being the evil turtle from the cartoon.
They kind of did.
Well,
without putting cybernetics in them.
I remember Slash being more ninja and actually competent.
He I don't know if competent's the right word. He just wanted his binky. Okay, it's been officially been too long since I've seen that episode. I don't
palm tree.
It was his palm tree that was in his bowl. Okay. Yeah, that was his binky.
And so they sent him to Florida.
That is actually a really good episode. Okay,
where you send all your problems is to Florida.
So moving through the end of the movie, there are two things I want to talk about. One, I love that their way of getting rid of them. Stinson kind of alluded to this earlier. You pour something in a Bart Simpson cup, you freeze it into an ice cube, and then you try to trick the baby mutants to eat them. Doesn't quite work, so they have this cool scene where they burst into a dance club, and lo and behold, who would be performing at this off the pier dance club other than Vanilla Ice? And most people that I talk to remember this movie mostly for this scene, with them fighting Toka Razor and the rest of the Foot, and him rapping to "Go Ninja, Go Ninja, Go." Is this the best thing Vanilla Ice has ever done?
How dare you ever ask me that question? The best thing he did in this movie was when it stopped. The smartest thing he did is when he saw Toka and Razor come in, he was like, oh crap, we got to get the hell out of here.
He does. He looks like we're leaving, and then when he realizes that he's not in danger, he's like, there's a song in this.
Whoa, I can spin this. Let's get a record deal.
Master of impromptu music creation.
Isn't it great, though?
Yeah.
All right. What did you think about this scene as a whole?
Again, this is one of those things. As a kid, I thought it was funny. You had the turtles blending in with the crowd, borrowing the neckties and whatever, and just jumping around, and really having a lot of easier time of beating up on Toka and Razor than they did the first time they met them.
That is true.
And then, of course, they actually do manage to put Toka and Razor down, and
with the old barrel trick, they basically just tripped them like you would see in any classic villain movie,
and held them down, even though it has been clearly shown that these guys are much stronger.
I agree with that. Now you could say that they're getting weaker due to the stuff they've already ingested, but we're probably thinking about that too much.
Which, was it really a good idea to have the turtles help make that stuff?
Probably not.
Yeah, they didn't use gloves or anything. That was not a very safe work environment. Okay. I don't know, the scene, I didn't really buy into that scene though, because even how they handled the Shredder, they basically Marty McFly'd him.
They did, and I want to say that this is, to me, is where the movie ends. Pretty much after they take care of Toka and Razor, the movie's over to me, because for those who don't know, Shredder walks in front of... He takes a hostage, and he walks in front of a speaker. They rescue the hostage, and I believe it was Mikey and Don blow the speaker with a guitar.
Yeah.
With a guitar. And so this somehow launches Shredder from out of the building, through a window, and under the pier.
You have 15 cases of perforated eardrums in that studio alone now, so...
But somehow he managed to get a hold of because you see the professor take the thing of mutagen, but somehow it gets back to Shredder.
Well, he's got that little vial.
That's right. He had the little vial
that he was threatening to pour on the girl.
Like a comic book villain, the professor just ran in and grabbed it and disappeared into. He was the only ninja in the whole movie.
Well, I actually do want to point out there was a reason for that, but we'll get to that in just a second. For those who don't know, I'm a huge wrestling fan, and this is where we see Kevin Nash make his Ninja Turtles debut as Super Shredder. And I can't usually say Super Shredder to any of my friends without them laughing or making fun of the Super Shredder scene.
Because you're lisp.
That's got to be it. All right, Dwight, what did you think about Super Shredder in the end?
This
of the
is
movie?
another one of those. At the time, I loved it because at the time, Shredder, more spikes, eviler looking helmet. He's bigger. This is awesome. It ups the ante. Looking back, no. They had in the original movie, the Turtles couldn't beat Shredder. Splinter did it, and now they were set up to. Surely they've been training since then. So now they're gearing up to go toe-to-toe with the regular Shredder again, and you're like, well, is their training going to pay off, or is Shredder still too much for him? And then he gets blasted out and ends up taking the mutagen, and just the whole thing is just, I'm going to knock some things around, and you're going to say some stuff, and then we're going to end it. Call it a day.
Well, I remember even as a kid thinking when he drank it, he was like, oh, he must have drank the last vial of ooze. Well, how much did he have to drink to get to that point? How did they know he drank all of it? What would have half done it? But I even remember how did that affect the spikes on him?
Right.
Yeah.
That was my thing. As a kid, I was like, how did that make his spikes grow? Even as a kid, I was like, wait a second.
The only thing the Turtles did against him at that point is saying, you got to listen to reason. You'll kill us all. And so be it. At that point, all the Turtles did was give each other a high five saying they're all Turtles, and Shredder kills himself.
Yes. I'd like to point out, they don't beat Shredder. Shredder beat Shredder.
He has no concept of load-bearing beams.
And maybe if they had, I don't know, foreshadowed to this or done something with more of a theme of that would have been cooler. But as an adult, that's just hard to buy.
They did point out one thing. After they rescued the professor, he was talking to them about how his obsession with revenge was all-consuming. And so I did think there was a little tie-in back to that.
Okay. I'll give you them. Okay, so we're about out of time, but I want to say one last thing about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2. I found what was supposed to be the original ending of Secret of the Ooze. And it completely explains why the professor runs off with the vial. It makes sense. Because apparently they changed the ending very last minute. In the initial screenplay, the professor was supposed to run off and go to a television monitor and speaking to someone that we couldn't see as the audience. And it was going to be revealed that his body was actually a robot and that he was a casing for an Ultron. Utrom. For those of you who don't know, that's the race that Krang is. They're little brain slugs that usually live in people's stomachs, but they robotic bodies. If you remember the cartoon, Krang was sitting in a robot body for the longest time. However, this scene was taken out for two reasons. One, the movie studio thought that kids would find it too confusing, which I disagree with completely. Two, apparently their original designs for how the Utrons look, it looked very scary. And I now want to see that more than ever. I'm just thinking this pink tentacle monster hanging out of a robot stomach.
If you woke up and looked at the end of your bed and saw Krang as he was in the cartoon, you would shit yourself. It is a brain with little stubby hand tentacles and a mouth and eyes. The mouth is full of sharp teeth. That thing is horrifying. Even it slurps when it moves around. I remember Shredder holding it one time. I was like, dude, you need to wash your hands.
I agree with that. And like I said, I wanted to see it, but I understand why they took it out.
You put plastic down when he comes over.
Well, it goes with their whole, we're making it more kid-friendly, more cartoony, more comic-y.
But you can't tell me that wouldn't have been a cooler ending.
Oh, it would have been. But then they would have had to follow that up in Turtles 3, and, well...
Okay, we're not going to discuss Turtles 3.
Nope.
There was
because
one? Nope.
There was a Turtles 3.
No,
it involves time travel and
you lost
a lot of bad.
Time travel, paradox, time travel.
You should have watched it because Casey Jones did return.
I stopped caring at that point because I think that was around the time they did the coming out of their shell.
Oh man, we could have talked about that too.
No,
All right,
we're done.
we are done.
Why
And
would we want to subject your audience to that?
we would. All right, so we want to go ahead and conclude this today. We've had a wonderful conversation about the first two Ninja Turtles movies, which if you for some reason have not seen and you were listening to this,
Kill yourself.
okay, don't kill yourself. Please go correct that.
Let's
not tell the audience that. As usual, if you have any comments, if you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comment section of the YouTube video, or you can find me on Twitter at Stephen Wilds. And if you want to talk to Dwight,
I'm on Facebook, Dwight Schueler. Good luck spelling that. You might just have better luck finding Stephen Wilds and looking into all his friends, and I'm on there.
Schueler is how you spell his last name.
Okay.
I can't believe I had to tell the audience.
Is that like Turtle power?
But not as cool. You
All right.
can't rap Dwight's name.
You can't. If they want, audience wants to talk to you, Stinson, and for some reason ask you about your weird obsession with cold cut fighting.
I mentioned it once. It's not an obsession, but I am pretty proficient in it. Jonathan Hunter Stinson on Facebook, or JH_Stinson on Twitter.
All right, and this has been another episode of Wilds on Film. Thank you guys for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Later.